Okay, chapter 2, part 2. So, buffers. Buffers are super important in biological system and ecosystems because essentially a buffer is a solution that resists changes in pH when acids or bases are added to it. So, think about homeostasis. Think about the idea that in a normal, stable system, that things can stay within the happy medium, if you will, in that kind of normal range or that more protective and natural and stable range. So buffers are essentially chemicals that are able to do that, not only in your body, but in an ecosystem as a whole. So buffers are brilliant in that sense. You will learn more about buffers and chemistry if you go on in chemistry. So carbonic acid and bicarbonate ions act as buffers in the blood. So they absorb hydrogen and hydroxide produced by metabolism. So for example, so when we do cellular respiration in our cells, we're going to make CO2 as a byproduct. So how do we transfer that CO2 in the blood without being toxic? We essentially combine it with bicarbonate, and now we have this carbonic acid. And so essentially we are able to carry around that CO2 without damaging. So there's this constant disassociation and reforming. And essentially what's happening by just doing this basic chemical reaction is that carbonic acid and bicarbonate are acting as buffers so that we don't change the pH. See, CO2 in water forms an acid. So essentially, we want to prevent changes in the pH by sequestering away the bicarbonate. Okay, this is an easier topic in chemistry. The four organic molecules in the body. So carbohydrates, lipids, also those include fats, waxes, oils, and steroids, proteins, and nucleic acids like DNA, RNA, and ATP. So when we think about organic molecules, we're thinking about those molecules that contain carbon and hydrogen and are associated with cells, so with life. And each of these organic molecules is made up of subunits. So we're going to go through these. It's super important to understand that for our macromolecules, we are going to start with molecules and we're going to build larger ones. So there's one basic repeating unit, subunit, that's going to make up our carbohydrates and our proteins and our lipids and our nucleic acids. So we will talk about that. There's two basic reactions that are either going to build up our macromolecules or break them down. Dehydration reaction. So essentially what we're doing is removing water, and that water by removing the water, we are creating links to build those subunits into the macromolecules. Now, hydrolysis is when we use water, we add it back to essentially back to those macromolecules and cause them to clearly I glitched there for a minute, but adding water back to the reaction is going to break the molecules back down into their subunits. So dehydration, we're taking out water, building it into bigger macromolecules. Hydrolysis, adding water, and now we're breaking it down into its subunits. So dehydration and hydrolysis reactions are really important. Okay. This is going to show us, if you want to pause, you can pause and look at the figure. But let's go ahead and go. Carbohydrates. Look at the word carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so we have these three basic elements that are going to be making up our carbohydrates. As we know, carbohydrates are my friend, maybe your friend, but they're used as an energy source, and in plants, it's going to help build the plants. So thinking about wood, it's made up of some very structural carbohydrates. Plant fiber comes from the cell walls of plants, also a carbohydrate. So carbohydrates are made up of a ratio of hydrogen of 2 to 1 parts oxygen. The basic unit of a carbohydrate, which is a monosaccharide, or one single sugar, mono means one, is glucose. So that's your repeating unit. Now we can make a disaccharide. Remember, we can build it up by doing dehydration synthesis. So now we have two monosaccharides, we join it together, and we've made a two-parted or two-unit saccharide, or two subunits of glucose make up a disaccharide. And these include sucrose and lactose, so table sugar and milk sugar. Poly means many, so polysaccharides, these include things like starches, cellulose, which is the cell walls of plants. We also call it dietary fiber, and glycogen, which is a way that we store our carbohydrates for on-demand use during meals. Glycogen is stored in our liver and muscles. So essentially now what you have is a long polymer, so many units of glucose to make up polysaccharides. All right, next we have our lipids. Lipids do not dissolve in water. Probably the most popular ones that you would know, would be our triglycerides, which include fatty acids or fats and oils. Fatty acids we're usually thinking about as coming from animal products, and oils coming from our plant products. We know that lipids are really good at storing energy, so they have 9 calories per gram compared to our carbohydrates and proteins, which are around 4 or 4.1 calories per gram. We know that our lipids, think about your body, in the tummy area and so on. We know that lipids, or, fats, are really good at insulation and cushioning us and protecting us from damage. Think about, your butt. And then, of course, we know we have saturated and unsaturated types of triglycerides. So saturated means that all their double bonds are met, and then unsaturated means there could be at least one single bond or more, polyunsaturated. Phospholipids are the primary components of plasma membranes. So we talked about the plasma membranes. You might remember we had a phosphate with some lipid tails. And so essentially we know that it's super important to the construction of the membrane. And the construction of the membrane is super important to regulating what comes into the cell and outside the cell and maintaining the cell integrity. Lastly, we have steroids. So many steroids are naturally produced and are components of membranes, but also are important to make some of our sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. Here's our little hydrophilic, water-loving polar head, the phosphate part of our phospholipid. And then here is the fatty acid part, which is going to be repelling water. So you see that the tails always want to be together, and the polar part always wants to be to the outside because the tails are hydrophobic. They do not want to be on the outside, potentially mingling with cytoplasm or what we would call interstitial fluid, or the fluid between cells. Okay, moving on to protein. Man, protein is really important, right? We know that. So protective stuff from our fingernails to our hair, collagen supporting our ligaments, and even collagen underneath our skin, helping support it from underneath out. Enzymes in our mouth, in our stomach and small intestine, in our cells. Enzymes are speeding up chemical reactions and breaking down materials. Transport, so if we go back to the phospholipid layer, that plasma membrane, you know that there's these protein, special proteins in the cell membrane that are going to allow materials to move into and out of the cell. Also, we know that transport molecules in the blood are super important, like, defense. So, we have antibodies. Antibodies are made up of proteins, and our antibodies are going to essentially attack foreign substances. In fact, we have this long-term immunity that comes from